and innovation. I've heard all of the panels so far, and I hear a lot of themes that I think you're going to hear in ours around change management, because we're not here just to talk tech, but we're also talking innovation, as well as more prosaic issues like fraud, and as well as the increase in communication and communication tools that we're all using. So as Zach said, I'm Jen Kruger. I'm the projects manager at United Methodist Women. We use a lot of tech to make our projects happen. And as a project manager, that happens to be one of the things that I seem to spend more time on than the projects themselves, is helping people get comfortable and finding the right tools to do their work. And I'm going to allow my panelists to introduce themselves. And Alder Van?
Hello. Hi, I'm Alder Van Daly. I'm the Executive Vice President for Institutional Advancement at Rising Ground.
Did you want to add anything about your use of tech?
Sure. Well, we are one of the largest social service organizations, human services organizations in the city. We are dedicated as an organization to reducing paper and reducing repetitive processes in our workforce and in our workplace. And the pandemic has only moved us forward on some of those thoughts. As a fundraiser, some of those very things were a little frightening. So we had to figure out how to do it.
Thanks, Alder Van. Dominic?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Dominic Ebanks. I'm president at Acuity Digital. We're a digital marketing firm that provides digital marketing, branding, web development, database automation, and also security. Our clientele, is quite wide, but we do have a strong focus with nonprofits and government public agencies. As a little backdrop, we started our company right back at the tail end of another monumental moment in history, which was the tail end of the financial crisis. And I'd like to say that there are a number of parallels we can make with what happened then and what happened now. One of the things that was a huge paradigm shift. As a result, technology, particularly open source, came about, and that's how we formed our company, with open source tools and the paradigm shift that people thinking of instead of the licensed role and users using free technology that the world has made. So we're really excited about this talk today. So I look forward to getting question and answer sessions.
Thanks, Dominic. Now I'd like to turn the floor over to Faizan.
Hey everyone, my name is Faizan Younus. I am a senior manager at NCheng LLP. NCheng has been serving the nonprofit industry for about 30 plus years. We serve primarily as fiscal managers for our clients. We also have an audit department, and we've been growing an implementation department in the technology space over the last year or so.
And I think I have someone else on the line from NCheng, Nerou.
Hello, I'm Nerou Cheng, and I'm the founder of NCheng. And as Faizan said, we've been around for over 30 years, working exclusively with nonprofit organizations. We have about 100 staff in New York and 20 in India. So technology is super important, and it's came as emphasis, and we have been really at the forefront of using technology, which Faizan will talk more about it. But I think we cannot lose sight of what we have to make sure, because we cannot use technology properly unless we really understand and master our operation. We need to know what we are doing, what are the gaps, because if you don't know the gaps, then you cannot go out and look for the right tools, because otherwise, and the two has to work together. So we can't just say, hey, I want technology, but not knowing what you need.
Rounding out our panel is Roberta.
Hi, welcome. My name is Roberta Katz. I'm the founder of Roberta Katz Consulting. I work with nonprofit organizations to help them build and maintain strong finance departments. For example, implementing policies and procedures, streamlining processes, fraud risk mitigation, and implementing internal controls. Before I started my consulting business, I worked for 15 years in senior financial management positions at major nonprofit organizations. And I actually implemented and administered automated systems at several nonprofit organizations. And I actually experienced the challenges of implementing and administering these systems. But I also saw the tremendous benefits that they offer and how they can literally transform a department. And I wanted to join this panel today because I would like to share some of my experiences and insights for those who have implemented or are thinking of implementing automated technology, and join our discussion today.
Thanks, Roberta. And certainly the pandemic has been a transformative experience for all of our organizations in one way or another. I know earlier panels touched on how it changed board relations, how it might have changed how people look at their finances and manage that. So I'd like to open it up perhaps first to Aldervan to talk about some of the things that specifically changed around donations and tech versus the analog world.
Well, the first thing that didn't change is that on one day in March, we were accepting gifts through all of the different ways that we do that online, checks that come in the mail, lots of checks come in the mail here. And the next day, there was no one in the office. There was no one to deposit the checks. There was no one to collect the checks. So that made us have to think about what we were doing and how we were doing it. We had to come up with a system for our organization that would allow someone to come into the office and gather those checks. It also made us think more about how do we encourage more of our donors to move to an online giving, which is never going to happen for everyone. There will always be people who will prefer to write a check. My mother-in-law will be sending a check until the last check is sent, because that's what she does. And I'm going to not encourage her not to do that, because that check cashes and it's worthwhile. But there are other people for whom we can suggest monthly giving, online giving, and other sources. So that was a big issue for us. The other issue for us as an organization, there are 5 people in my institutional development department, and 3 of us had to be able to communicate on every donation, including connect with finance. So we had to find both virtual and I would say digital and analog ways of getting the checks from here to the bank and then getting thank you letters to the donors. We did this by being as clever as we could with sending data back and forth to each other, producing letters at home, all of that sort of thing. When we got back from the pandemic, we made some decisions about what we kept. In the past, we'd kept thousands and thousands and thousands of sheets of paper. What we discovered during the pandemic was that we didn't really need all that paper. We could just as easily keep all of that in digital files, and if our board member called or a donor called, pull up a digital version of whatever it was that we had sent them originally. So we went with moving in that direction, and in turn, we're saving money, saving paper, saving trees, and actually saving time, not scanning documents that don't need, to make copies of things. So that's a beginning of how we started, at least on the individual giving and on those areas. There's a whole another story, which I'm sure we'll get about as far as virtual events and that sort of thing is concerned.
Right, true. United Methodist Women experience the same thing. Our donor base, the average age is 71. They write a lot of checks. And that was a huge scramble at the very beginning to just figure out what to do with the mail and how to get it in our accounts so that the members who were moved to give at this moment of crisis were feeling like we were recognizing their gifts. I will say we pushed out a Giving Tuesday Now campaign. I don't know how many people attending this conference participated in Giving Tuesday Now in May. We created a special COVID-19 relief fund for some of our organizations in the United States and around the world, which we have supported in the past. And we ran it as an all digital campaign, specifically encouraging our members and supporters to do it digitally as a way to expedite getting the funds in and then back out again to our supporters. That was certainly one of the larger changes. But I know some of my other panelists, the way their work is handled was relatively similar, because Dominic, I believe your organization has worked hybrid or virtually since its inception. Can you talk a little bit about how you're set up and if anything really changed for you all during the pandemic?
Sure, yeah. So we have our two main offices are between Pittsburgh and New York City. And we have staff in both the offices and also satellite in the Metro Atlanta area. One of the things that I have to say is, yeah, as an IT firm, we've embedded in our DNA to be virtual and to collaborate. So for the past 10 years, that's what we have been doing. But we also had a lot of in-person as well. I mean, getting to know a client, and of course, I'm talking from a provider standpoint, we're not a nonprofit. We would be an extension of our nonprofit clients. So we would go into their office and have in-person. So that has definitely changed, even though we've been digital for quite a while. We're getting to know new clients through this same medium that we have here, right? And it hasn't been easy, but we're getting it done. What we do is work that's very internal, very personal with organization. We like to say, if we're doing a branding project or even a database system, we're looking to find out where issues are. And it's a lot harder to communicate using sometimes digital mediums as opposed to someone just sitting down, we like to say, taking our clothes off and being naked, right? What's going on in the organization? Where can we help? It's a little bit different doing it by video. However, we've been getting through it, which I think is an interesting takeaway point, is that, as we transition, what is that happy middle ground for everyone? The pendulum swings, right? And it's not going to be all digital, however, I think we'll, with our clients, they have mentioned it, that they have seen some positive cherry picking opportunities. So perhaps they can have a certain percentage of the work that they do digital, and the other part, when they're in person, they'll be able to provide a more effective meeting per se, because a lot of the preliminaries have been done digitally, what have you. So I think a good takeaway is for all the organizations to take a look and say, hey, listen, what benefits can we pull from this? What should remain the same? What should change? I think it's an amazing opportunity of learning. What we like to say is, I think we've all been in what we like to call a social science experiment for the past year and a half, to say the least. And it's very hard to look at it as such because we're in the middle of it and we feel the pain. But if we take a step back, there are a lot of opportunities to learn, like anything that we go through in life. So I think this is an awesome opportunity. And I think this was also touched on even in the panel before ours. So.
Yeah, may I just chime in? Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think the pandemic and the remote working had a pretty significant impact on finance departments at nonprofit organizations, because traditionally finance departments always worked in the office on site. They were able to collaborate, and their finance departments were what I would call paper intensive. So they would have binders of papers and their contracts were in binders, vendor contracts, government contracts. So I think with this pandemic, whether they move back to in-office or a hybrid situation, I think they really are moving not only on implementing automated systems like invoice processing and purchase orders, but also setting up something as simple as a shared drive, a secure shared drive, where information and documents can be shared internally. And I know this is those who had financial audits last year. This was problematic because the auditors would ask for documents and they were in the office and nobody had access to the office. So there had to be workarounds. So I think the nonprofit's finance function, whether they're going to be fully remote or hybrid or whatever, they are moving to scanning documents, maintaining them, sharing them. Emails back and forth are not official, but if we could set up a directory that's organized and category, where we can just look at the information without emails back and forth. I think that's really the way to go. And also to prepare for potential other disruptions, which might happen. So I think that's really the impact on finance.
Do you mind if I chime in as well, Jen? Yeah, so Roberta really hit it on the head here. What we find is a lot of these processes were built over time, and they've been happening the same way, and it's a very, very paper-intensive kind of department. Everything needs to be documented, and we feel like we need it to be in a drawer somewhere so we can pull it out when the auditor says, do you have that? We don't want to scan it over. We want to pull it from a folder and say, here it is. And this whole change to remote really helped us readjust people's thought process around that. People were more privy to say, okay, maybe I don't need it to be in paper. Maybe it's okay if I have it electronic. As you can imagine, paper-intensive department, there are checks going out, there are payables coming in, there are things that need to be paid. And all these things are literally paper files that are sitting in a bin somewhere. And effectively, if it's an inbox for accounts payable, someone has to go in and go through this batch of data and reinvent the wheel, constantly looking through it to see what it is, why is it being paid. And in our process, we scan everything after the fact. So even if we were cutting a check in the old world, we would be paying the bill, and then after it's paid, we would be scanning it all into our accounting system. So we are audit ready. So with this whole new process, we're able to expedite and really be more efficient in how we're operating on the accounts payable cycle.
Yeah, I think, not just knowing our operations, but being able to use an opportunity, a crisis is an opportunity, to make some of these logical changes we all knew we should have. We all knew it wasn't a good idea that the only copy of something lived in a paper file in someone's office, but we all had it brought home to us. But now that we're returning to the office, I'm wondering if people are thinking about sort of, what does it mean to be hybrid? What kind of policies and procedures we might need to create? It's now been a year. We can't say it's an immediate crisis. I know almost everyone on this panel has great ideas, so just start talking.
For us, fortunately, we're in an industry where the service we provided is very conducive to working remote. So we're going to offer our staff the flexibility to just either you continue to work from home, or you can go work in the office, because sometimes you want to have that atmosphere of camaraderie, getting together, but we're not going to force anything. But the technology that's been put in front of us, we had researched for technology to really, like money.com, that's when we found it. Vic AI, we found it one there. And we changed a bunch of technology that allows us to work more efficiently. And the other part is, from the client's point of view, it's accepted more with less reluctance. And then at the end, it's like any change. The first thing is, no, I don't want to do it. But then when they adopt it, what they find is their job is even easier. So when you said that the bill processing system, the approval system, it's just like intuitive. And and even to some people that are reluctant to adopt technology, it's when they started, and we do quite a bit of hand holding, then say, oh, yes. So it's been really good in that sense.
If I may jump in and take a step back, one of the things that I think are important is corporate culture. As we talk about change, there's that adage, the only thing that's constant is change. And one of the, back in my MBA day, my MBA school days, we always talked about this concept of push versus pull, right? We've all been pushed into this environment, whether we like it or not. We're all here, and as opposed to having this event, in person, we're doing it by video. We were pushed into this, just like a lot of these organizations were pushed into using certain types of technology. So I would first talk, to the managers, directors, and executive, executive leadership. Look at the organization, where would you push certain elements of technology that would be of value? Does it make sense to have a pull approach? Perhaps you see an opportunity and maybe it's a bit more of a long-term effort, but you do see the benefit, you do see the reward, perhaps looking at technology, a new technology in that manner as well. Talk about corporate culture. Some of this can also come from the bottom up. So perhaps some of these organizations can have some type of vehicle where staff, the day-to-day staff that are actually doing the activities, perhaps there's some tool that they can put input in on something to change a particular task that they spend a lot of time on and they don't really need to. Could it be done anonymously? Could it be done, through some other method? But I think this is a great crossroad that we're at right now for these elements of change.
Yeah, I'd like to add, as a provider, we work with 25,000 people a year, 10,000 people on a one-to-one basis. We never closed. We didn't have the luxury of saying, oh, I know you live in an IDD and intellectual disability home, but you guys are going to be on your own for the next few months because none of the staff's going to come in. So our organization continued to function, and I would say of the 1,600 employees we have, about 800 of them never stopped working, never stopped going into work. We have places that are staffed 24 hours a day. What we did find, though, was that there were staff in some of our programmatic areas who were coming into the office every day who could have done part of their job from home just as well, because a big portion of their job was to be in other people's homes or connecting with people or making sure people were safe, seeing how they were doing, doing foster care checks or preventative services checks. So there was that area. And so we restructured our offices. We were in the process of rebuilding our offices anyway, but we are looking at only bringing back something like a third of the people into the office who would have, on a full-time basis, that would have been in the office originally. So instead of, there would have been like 300 people in our offices, there'll be like 100 people. Of the others, there's a portion of them who will come in maybe once a week for a one-on-one meeting, or if they have a meeting with a supported person or some families that they're working with. And then there'll be others that might only come in once a month for their one-on-one with their boss or for a staff meeting or something of that nature. So we've certainly rethought the processes for, let's say, the half of the people who don't have to be with people all the time. But that brought up a question of equity and us really having to think through, looking at it from an equity lens, what was fair and what wasn't fair. What did we provide? What didn't we provide? And we really had to think hard about how we track time and how we track achievement in order to make sure that we were being fair to all of our employees.
Talk about the moving back to the office and trying to kind of maximize the usage and to still, even though now we're reopening again, we still want to give the flexibility of having the spacing and all of that. So we just adopted a software that allows people to book their seats, because our seats are not, it's like the work is interchangeable. So they go online, we had a software that allowed them to book that. And then that system, if you don't show up in half an hour, then it's available for somebody else. So that allows to protect them and also have the flexibility and not having to coordinate with the staff doing that to schedule the space. So technology is really, a lot is around, and then I think it just keeps coming as the needs arise.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in that as the work environment changes, remote to office or hybrid, it's very important to have documented policies, because I think you talked about equity across the organization. Somebody's working from home and they're allowed to work from home, but they have to pay for their Wi-Fi. What will be reimbursed? If their computer breaks or they need another webcam or a printer, what will they get? What will they be provided with? Also in terms of the security of the data of your computer when you're working from home. You know, if rules change, people need to know what the rules are, and it needs to be enforced throughout the organization. And in terms of managing our technology and our computer systems, you know, I'm very big on having written policies and procedures, but in terms of managing computer systems, you need to have written policies in terms of computer system access and backup. Who's in charge of assigning rights to the computer systems, and when is the system backed up? Who's responsible for backing it up? Is there a disaster recovery plan? And what is that? And then if technology factors into your day-to-day procedures, you need to have those procedures written in a policies and procedures manual. So it applies not only for finance, but it really applies for departments throughout the organization.
You know, I think I just want to add that with working remote, all our staff now is using their cell phone. So what we did is we are adjusting our telephone system where they will be using their cell phone, but it's not coming out of their bill. It's go through our overall system. So I don't know how it works exactly, but the effect is that it's not going to impact theirs. And then they cannot be, you know, sometimes clients call them on their personal cell phone all the time. This way, they can't call them on their cell phone. So it just kind of makes them more, give them more flexibility in terms of how their cell phone is being used by the firm.
If I could just talk about one point that, as we were talking, it kind of rung in my head, is the digital divide. So we're all talking about these great technologies, and you know, as a firm, we're building solutions for our clients, but we've always stood by this one point: people come first, technology comes second. You know, these technologies are a mechanism or a widget. And one of the digital divides that come to mind, most importantly to me, because I have family that's going through it right now, is age. What we're seeing is a loss of organizational knowledge that's walking through the door, because what's happening is, and you know, again, we were forced into this. Some folks said, you know what, I'm doing early retirement. What am I doing on a Zoom? You know, what am I doing on some other web platform? I have no time for that. And internally, our clients know that they're losing a very important person, and the reason why is because this person felt that they shouldn't have to go through this type of engagement. But I think if we look back and kind of peel it a little bit more, I would question the organization and the leadership. You know, were these folks trained on using these technologies? You know, all of a sudden now, for example, we're all going to some type of Google platform, right? And that's where the documents are, and we're sharing documents. But some of these, workers, they've never used this before, and no one's ever trained them. And as a result, they may leave, or, perhaps some will stay and learn. But I know people within my family, it's a really big issue. So I think a walk away from this, again, to leadership, and I know the last panel talked about, how much money is put into training. So well understood. Perhaps we can look at how that money is being spent, but maybe some low-hanging fruit training sessions on just operations, like a default plan, like that we're living now in the past year and a half. If this happens, perhaps we'll use this system. Let's do some basic training on Google, basic training on video, or whatever the next issue may be. Just wanted to share that thought.
That's a very good point. And I just want to jump in here because, as I mentioned in my introduction, I actually implemented systems at nonprofit organizations, and I was responsible for the training. And as you mentioned, technology is just a tool. It's really the people. The people have to know how to use the tools. And what I would say is I've categorized the end users, people who are using the systems, into 3 categories. One of them is those who are very tech savvy, computer savvy. They'll take the software and they'll run with it. The second group is those who really don't feel comfortable with computers. And I had those. It was a small subset of people, but they really didn't feel comfortable. So what I did was I set up sessions with them, and we did screen shares. And every time they had to perform their jobs, we would do screen shares, and I would walk them through how they do their job on the software. And it took a couple of sessions until I finally felt comfortable. But the third group, which is, we're talking about change management, the third group, which I think is probably the largest group, is those who are resistant to change. I heard over and over and over again, why do we have to do this? We never had to do this before. So I think they feel that way because they don't know the benefit of the technology, they don't understand how to use it, and they don't feel comfortable with it. So what I did in that case, because the systems that we implemented were usually customized, because nonprofits have complicated cost allocations, we had to have the software customized. So what I did, and I found that the training materials from the software vendors were usually very standard, and it didn't really address how we processed our data. So what I did was I created my own manual, a user guide manual that was a step-by-step process, and it includes screenshots of the software. And in addition to that, myself and my team, we made our own video, and we each took different roles. You know, I was the role of the approver, they were the role of the person submitting, and we created a video. It took time, and we distributed it to the entire organization. And we actually had them sign an acknowledgement that they watched the video. And at the end of the day, when we rolled out that system, we had almost no questions on the functionalities of the system. And then those people who complained about change came to me and really thanked me for spearheading the implementation of the automation, because it helped them do their job. They had the tools now. For example, a program manager is responsible for their budgets, but they would get the data without automated technology. The data would go from here, there, and everywhere. But when they had the automated system, they had all the data right there in one place, and it empowered them and enabled them to do their jobs better. So I think training is really crucial, and no one size fits all. And you're going to have, if you have 1,000 employees, you'll have a lot of people with different backgrounds, and you really need to work hard, because it needs to be, you know, people who are implementing the data and are responsible for generating accurate, you know, financial data really need to have that training. So, you know, that would be my my experience.
If I can chime in, my experience during the pandemic especially was quite a bit different. If it was 2018 and I said, hey guys, let's implement a new AP system, the clients would usually say no. Why would I change? The process works. I know how it works. I don't want to learn something new. But COVID-19 was a really strong change management tool. It was a big, big unfreeze moment, and folks said, hey, I'm already learning Zoom. I have to learn it. I'm learning Teams. I need to do all of these things that I never had to do before. What's one more thing, right? And when at that point, it wasn't a matter of, this is a decision, I don't want to learn it. It was a matter of, I have to learn it. I have to be a part of this process. And people really bought into it. People were willing to learn new systems. And I think there is another unfreeze moment coming as we go back to the office. Normalcy hasn't hit yet. And that unchanged moment is going to come once again as we kind of gear up for this new world. And we really need to focus on taking the best practices that we learned during the pandemic and applying them back to normalcy, and then also developing better practices and how we work in this new hybrid model.
Yeah, I think the whole notion of what does it mean to be hybrid, everything from, you know, having something like Nerou described as a little app to sign up for a desk. I know my office is going to that. You make a reservation and you can coordinate with your team members or your project team or whatever it is, so that if you want to all be there at the same time, you can. To really understanding what changed that was a great idea, like not making paper copies of everything. Even to Roberta's suggestions about, you know, making sure your training is customized for your organization. Adding that screenshots and a video and what we call ride alongsides. I literally, someone who's well-trained will just sit on a Teams call and be there in case the person executing it for the first few times has a question. Alderman, have you all done any training or changes to how things are happening in your development group that you had to readjust during this COVID time?
Well, we addressed a lot of things as far as the, especially in the individual giving area. We would be, we did full newsletters and direct mail and everything not being here, you know, from home, with using shared drives and using all that sort of stuff. And luckily our data is hosted So we were able to get to it at any time without having to think about it, and run reports for board meetings and for boards and all those sort of things. The biggest change has been in our working with finance, as I said earlier, and how we manage that relationship and getting data to them and getting checks to them and that sort of thing. One thing I want to bring up, which is a little bit off, but I think it's important, with all of the talk about technology and all of the things that we're doing, especially in my world and fundraising, I have used more of these than I were before, which is just a blank card that I then write a personal note on. It goes in an envelope and you put this thing called a stamp on it. And then you drop it in, or you give it to someone and they put it in a blue box and it shows up at someone's home. Because what we discovered was, as we were asking people to do more and more technology and connecting with us in these virtual ways, it became more important for us to make personal relationships with them, especially since we were in this COVID period getting donors for whom we didn't know quite why they were making a gift or what their relationship was with us. They were acquisition donors, and they were sometimes giving rather large gifts for us. And so we wanted to figure out how to do that. So my whole team, we sat down and wrote notes to the majority of our donors over a certain level, just letting them know we were okay. We also have a lot of donors, and a lot of nonprofits are this way. And I don't know how you guys are, Jen, but we don't have their email addresses. All we have are their mailing addresses. And many of them either of a certain age, but they don't have an email address, they don't want any more email, whatever. So, finding ways to connect with them through physical means became very important if we were going to meet those financial goals that we've set out.
Yeah, hybridizing the way we communicate. So we have all these great new virtual tools, but also going back to the notes. I'm getting ready to run a postcard campaign. Although it has a virtual aspect, it's going to have a QR code on it that they can scan with their phone that will take them to an online donation form should they choose. This is revolutionary for our organization. Dominic's laughing because I bet many of his clients have been doing these kinds of things for years. But for an organization that has an older donor base, as well as an older staff base,
Yeah.
I think the Urban League said they were celebrating 100 plus. We're at 152 years at United Methodist Women.
190.
Whoa, you beat us. Nice. Sometimes I feel like we're all relying on files left over from 100 years ago. So we've talked about a whole bunch of different things. One I haven't heard much about is virtual events. So Aldervan, I don't know, did you run any virtual fundraising events?
Yes, we did a virtual gala last year. It was a huge success for us, partially because the cost was so much less than it would be to do it at an event space. We were able to actually make up for what we weren't, the few donations we weren't able to bring in. The interesting things about the virtual gala was that many of our board members and our table buyers were pretty excited about being able to invite their friend in Albuquerque or invite their friend out of town to the gala to see the organization they had always heard about, but we're never going to fly in town, on the date we have picked in order to do the gala. What we did do was we added a real component, which was that every person who was coming to the gala, I think there were 450 of them, got a goodie box. So they got a box, and in the box was a gift, how to get on to the session so they could look at it. We used a special platform. It wasn't just a Zoom. It was a special platform, how to get into the platform. And then it also had a way for them to make to bid on service auction items. It also had cocktail mix, arugula, and a black and white cookie. All the things that sort of say, welcome to New York, and we're thrilled to have you. But we had those shipped out, and we did those, so they arrived the week. So the gala was on Tuesday. They started arriving on Friday. But that was the sort of thing to tie people back to the gala so that they'd actually show up. This year, we are doing, in our 190th anniversary, we're continuing to do virtual events. We're working with one of our founding partners, actually, from 190 years ago, Trinity Church Wall Street, to do a series of 4 discussions about social services and the history of social service, race and social services, gender and social services, and philanthropy and social services. And the first 3 of those for sure will be virtual. The first one has already happened. The next one's coming up next week, June 24th. And you can find information on our website at Rising Ground. But they've been very successful in bringing people in who would not have known about the organization otherwise. We will not be doing another virtual gala. We feel like that train has left the station. So we put our gala off until March of 2022. We will be doing a small in-person event in September to test the waters. But we felt like there's only so much virtual you can do, although we're anticipating that the March 22 event will have a hybrid element to it. That we will run it somehow so that people can invite their own neighbor from their neighborhood in Wisconsin or wherever they were from, or somebody who isn't old enough who is too old to come, or isn't quite comfortable coming out, or whatever those things might be. So I think that hybrid in some form is here to stay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If I could add on to that in terms of tools that we've seen, even touching on, this past topic of training and policies and such, we see a number of firms who weren't very digital, and they have become digital. They've entered the scene using, secured intranet platforms to share documents that they have not before. Of course, you want to be cognizant of hacks and things of that nature. So there are a lot of tools that can be layered to protect certain sensitive information. We've seen organizations use what they call a digital knowledge base. That's a platform you're able to have a number of documents and tools, and on the back end you can track who's downloading what and so forth. Each organization has a different application, benefit and pros and cons and such with that. We talked about a little bit earlier, putting training videos online, right? So a lot of us, use PDFs and so forth as our manual to complement that, or depending on the situation, replace that to be actual training videos, right? So it's the sound and the visual. It's all about how effective it is to the folk that are viewing it. And also, what we noticed an uptick in is what they call LMS systems, learning management systems. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of universities are known for this, and now we know that high school and down, and now corporations and so forth have been using this online platform where you're able to share information. You can take your own course, if you will. You can have it can be 100% digital. It can be a hybrid, perhaps certain, especially as we're transitioning back into the office, perhaps certain information can be in person. Other parts can be on this e-learning platform or LMS platform. You can go at your own pace. Some folks, prefer to do things like this at night, looking at a training session at night, taking their time, pause, come back at it 2 days later. Loads of flexibility in that. So these are some of the things that have been talked about with even some of our small nonprofit organizations. And those who are listening, some of the tools that we're talking about doesn't necessarily mean that you have a staff of 500. We know of organizations, staff of 5 and 10 that are using some of these tools, especially when they have a member base, for an example. And of course, you have your board, right? So a lot of these tools can be leveraged in many different ways.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring up a point before we end the session, is that when we implement these automated systems, it's very important to be sure that there are proper internal controls within the system. For example, in the previous panel, they talked about credit cards. They've distributed a lot of credit cards to a lot of their employees during this pandemic, but somebody has to be there to make sure that the credit card spending is valid and the proper documentation is submitted. And this may sound interesting, but when I implemented a system and I wanted to set up approvals, like who's approving for who, for whom, I didn't get the same answer from two people, like who's your supervisor? They had a supervisor for HR, they had a supervisor for expenses. So what I decided to do is I said, I'm going to use our organization chart. And whoever is your supervisor on the organization chart, that's your supervisor in the automated system. And when you set up the system, there is a routing, and you need to route these transactions to the approver. So I think thinking about having, and I know these systems are built with the abilities for this internal controls, but they need to be implemented correctly in order to have an efficient and effective system that generates accurate and reliable financial data that's for the finance department.
Yeah, I think that's also relevant for any system you implement during this process or afterwards. It's really knowing your process as it is today and mapping technology around that process. How do we fit in our current business requirements around what we're going to implement? So for us, we implemented Monday.com for internal use cases as well as external. And all the triggers that we had in the real world, we built them into Monday. So if I had needed a two-step review process for a grant, I would go ahead and add the client to the board, and we would have an internal review with the client, and it's all visibility is there. So I know when the client saw it, I know when my team saw it, I know if there are any notes related to it. So it really felt like we were still in the office, and we were able to minimize emails back and forth and calls and texts. It all happened on one platform, and everybody had a pulse on what was going on with each and every transaction.
And it's all about communication, especially now. So it's just like, what are the tools available to us to communicate better? That I'm not a technology person. I know what I want out of technology, but I'm very used to paper and pencil. So my assistant finally, because I was doing that all the time and setting, so this is what she gave me, and she taught me how to use it. It's called Remarkable. I can write things down. It can be converted to script, and I can email it to her. So a lot of things I do, I don't use paper as much anymore. So when I have a meeting, I just jot my notes on the meeting and file whatever I want. It's really kind of incredible. And being somebody who likes technology but is not good at it, so our team, we use Quick Assist. When I need something, they jump there on Quick Assist, hey, do this. So I'm a slow learner, but they force me to learn because I don't have a choice. So communication and how to communicate effectively is important because you need technology. You cannot avoid it, whether you like it or not.
In fact, that's the one question that I see that's already in the Q&A is, could we say the names of some of these systems that we're talking about for reserving desks or the cell phone system or any of these? We're not endorsing these. They're not going to answer. This is I'm related to a lawyer statement. We're not endorsing these. They're not going to solve all your problems. They're just ideas. They're places to go look. And I think Faizan probably has the names of the hoteling system that you're using.
Yeah, Heidi, we're using SmartWay 2 as our desk management system for our office, and we're an Office 365 Enterprise, and we're using an extension of Microsoft Teams to get our team cell phone numbers associated with their team's accounts.
Cool. I know my office is getting ready to use a piece of software that started out as carpooling software. It's called Bees Co-op. It looks like Scoop, which isn't what it is. Although Cheng uses Monday.com, we use Basecamp to help schedule projects and meetings and keep all of the information about something in one place so that everybody can get access to it on the cloud. Are there other tools that people would like to mention by name?
Well, I know in terms of invoice processing, because one of the issues was, when people weren't in the office and vendors were sending invoices. And there are several products out there, use Chrome River, Concur, and they have a component which not everybody uses, is where the vendors will actually send the invoices to like a PO box at the vendor. So all those invoices go to them. You don't have to worry about receiving them in the office and missing a day of mail. And they will actually input the invoices in the system. They can't code them and process them, but they will input them in the system, set them up so that when you come in, you just see which invoices came from the vendor today that need to be processed. So that's a component of these invoice processing systems that I don't think everybody uses, but I think it's worthwhile checking into to see if it's beneficial for your organization.
I'm also going to throw out just at the end, if you may already have software that you use or something that you use for your CRM or your donor database management, if you're in my world, and you may not be using all the pieces of it. You may be paying just to put gifts in. This was the time to look at everything it does. You're paying for it anyway.
Yes.
You're probably paying customer support. Get them on the phone. Make them show you how to use it. That's their job. So, why, as you look at other things, make sure you're using fully what you already have. Don't just assume that whatever is shiny is going to be better than what you already have on your desk. It may not be true.
That's a really great point. And what's come out of this for us is this really major shift to data governance. We have to govern data. We are really focused on making sure that the new tools we're implementing are giving us the things we want to look at, the data points that we want to see. And then we take those data points and we make sure that our old data structures kind of line up with that. So the organization is going to be more data driven as we come out of this. The approaches are all shifting towards really making data driven approaches.
And with the thing that we implemented, it's just we send report almost at a push of a button. And even the staff doing the work at a push of a button, they see things that they should be seeing. And then they were surprised, whoa, I didn't know we could get that. And now you don't have to explain. They self review themselves on their performance. So I think with having those tools, like Replicon, what we did is when we adopted that software, we had to revamp how we code our service. We had to restudy what is our service code, and we change the coding, because unless you integrate all of that, then you get garbage out of it and it's not useful. So I think that's why you need to know what your systems are, what you're trying to achieve, and then look for the technology. You're muted, Dom.
Oh, I'm muted. Oh, I'm back. If I can underscore, Aldovan and Nero, what you guys mentioned, I think is a key point that folks should walk away with is look at the systems that you have in place before getting that new shiny item. And everyone says, oh, they mentioned a big name. And of course it'll do those things, but you only need the 20% of the functionality, or inverse, whatever the case may be. So, I know a little bit earlier we talked about even fundraising. We speak to some of the small nonprofits out there, and some of them are still using, like let's say a fundamental system for basic fundraising or donations, PayPal, things of that nature. There are other tools you can upgrade that doesn't have to be a full CRM, especially if your budget doesn't allow it. We recommend it, but circumstances are circumstances. There are open source donation platforms and some proprietary donation-based platforms that operate kind of like a quasi CRM, right? It doesn't have the full functionality, but it does have reporting of donors and other interactions that you may have had with them. Some of them are totally free. You just have to pay for the implementation of it. So that's something to consider if you're not budget ready for a full proper CRM. That's something to look at, speak with your technology provider about. Other things to think about are, lead generation forms. Look at your operations. Do folks need to come at your front door, at your doorstep to get that initial engagement? Perhaps there can be some lead generation forms in there, pulls in data, builds a profile on that person, and then you can start engagement from there. On the back end, your staff can take notes about each interaction. There are a number of tools out there that can be used. We also have noticed a big trend with organizations that have a lot of information to share. They're leaning towards more online database directories. You can have it built within your website, or resource centers. You can have it built within your website. You can have it hosted on a third-party platform. Some are free depending on the volume and things of that nature. But if you're a member organization, for an example, and you're always giving out information to your stakeholders, that can be an option as well. Again, that balance of digital and in person or whatever interaction you have is key and important. We talked about even online communities is another thing that we've noticed, and I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. But just to underscore, give your stakeholders that level of engagement, even though they're not at the office or at your site. Logging in, perhaps they can communicate with one another depending on what your organization does. Perhaps they can communicate directly to staff. Forums, having a discussion like this within an organization's website is definitely possible as well. So, these are just a few things that can be one can walk away with. I wouldn't be able to mention too many names because, conflict and so forth, but there are loads of options out there, open source and proprietary system.
I would just have one final thought in terms of generating data. I know there's increasing demand from donors for data because we're all chasing after the same dollars, as well as internally, organizations are making critical decisions, program profitability, should they cut programs, and they need the data, they need the reports. But in order to get accurate and timely data, you must have processes in place where you're ensured, let's say you're doing a monthly financial, that all the revenue for the month has been input, have all the expenses been input. So you need to be sure that everybody is inputting the data and you have it by due date, because we have to produce financials the next week for the board. If you don't have all your data in, you can, the technology will print reports regardless. But you have to have that structure in place, and I call it a financial closing process, which I've implemented at many nonprofits, and it really is crucial in order to get that accurate and timely data.
Yeah, data hygiene is hugely important. And I see Zach's smiling face near ours, which indicates we are out of time. We had other topics we could have talked about, other ways to link to previous panels, but hopefully we'll all get a chance to see each other and discuss these things at future meetings, whether they are on Zoom or not. Over to you, Zach.
So sorry to end the party. I thought things were getting especially interesting. It went from an expert panel to what seemed at times something like an intervention for people. Use all your software. It's already there. Really look what's in front of you. Thank you so much, Jen, for moderating that. I think that was a really great discussion. Really made issues of data hygiene come alive. In lieu of audience applause, of course, I'll give a little clap, but I think Jen hinted at something that we're all really hoping that next year's Opcon will be back in person, but we'll see after a year like we've all had, who can predict anything anymore, right? Except let's keep the conversation going. We got to